we can get seated now, and we'll get started. Welcome to the annual meeting of the Minnesota Streetcar Museum. Can everyone hear me all right? Because I feel like I'm a long ways away. I am. Okay, my name is Aaron Isaacs. I'm the chairman of the board of directors. For those of you who, most of us know each other, but for those of you who may not know, I'd like to introduce the board of directors and other people who are officers. Karen, if you can just start and go around.
Okay, I'm Karen Kurtzman. I'm on the board, and I work primarily out of ESL.
Todd Bender, I'm the superintendent ESL.
I'm Dick Sawacki, I'm the chief mechanical officer.
Bruce Gustafson, general superintendent.
John Dillery, I'm a board member and safety superintendent.
Chris, introduce yourself.
I'm Chris Heck, I'm the treasurer of MSM.
And then over on this side.
I'm Ben Franksy, I'm one of the directors and the IT director.
Jim Vaikunis, a director, corporate secretary, and a bunch of other stuff.
All right. And so what we're going to do today, we're having the member meeting, and it's going to be followed by the board meeting. Normally at the board meeting we have all the reports. Obviously we're going to do all the informational reports on the member meeting. So we'll have the member meeting, and then we'll have a little entertainment, a little presentation. I've got some film here that I think you'll find interesting to do that. And then we'll have the board meeting. At the board meeting, we're going to approve the annual budget and approve officers for the next year. At the member meeting here, down the agenda, we have our board terms are staggered. They're 3-year terms staggered, and so I'm up and Dave French is up this year, and we're running unopposed, and so we'll be asking for an approval by acclamation. I must tell you, today we're worried about Dave French because Dave is going in for an operation to try to save his leg. A couple of months ago, he fell and he suffered a very bad leg break. He has diabetes, and he's developed a bad infection. And they've been fighting this infection, and apparently today is going to determine whether or not they can keep the leg. So we're all going to think positive thoughts on behalf of Dave, and hopefully he can learn. For business, by the way, we have restrooms that are down the hall. You have to see John Dillery so he can open it up with his key card. And John is our host today. This is the Fred T. Haywood office building of Metro Transit, where I used to work and John still works. And so it's nice. It's a nice room to look at. And by the way, you'll see on the TV screens, it'll show simultaneously what's up on the screen here. So, we're going to do year in review. Ben, next slide, please. Of course, we had the Winona 10 dedication. We've got 2 slides for that. Those are the granddaughters of the last motorman who cut the ribbon. Here's all 3 cars out there. Next one. And here you have the 2 project managers, Ken Albrecht and Howie Melko, who made this thing possible over 14 years of long, long hard work. Next slide. And I threw this in. These are the folks from the Winona Foundation. And when I was looking for grant funding, I thought I was getting the Winona Community Foundation, and I found this, which of all things is located in Seattle, Washington. And it turns out that this is a family that was a lumbering company. And after they cut down all the trees in southeast Minnesota, they moved to the Pacific Northwest, but they still cared about Winona. And so they were one of the 2 major funders of the Winona restoration. They gave us, I don't know, about 5 or 6 different grants, totaling, I think, $40,000, $50,000. And so they attended it, and I just wanted to throw in their picture. Now, obviously we had a problem with Winona 10 in that the motor went bad. So Winona 10 is done, only it's not done, and Dick Sawacki will be talking later about what's happening with the motor. We had the same sort of done but not quite done with 1300. The 1300 truck overhaul was completed, which was a major project. This was a $150,000 project. And then one of 1300's motors went bad. Dick has also been honchoing that, and we'll see where that goes. There's the crew, most of the crew. That's kneeling down is Rob Mangles, who's been our contractor building it, and then our volunteer crew. I think working with Rob has been extremely helpful because our crew not only has put in a fair amount of sweat equity on this, but they've been able to watch the whole process and really learn what these trucks are all about. And I think that's just invaluable. Next slide. So we had upgrades of the Excelsior car barn and exhibits. Todd and Karen can tell us more about that when we get down to their reports, but there's one more picture. Is the Karen's Corner sign still up?
It's not back up after we did some finishing, but
There's
that
Karen.
was a gift from the restoration crew, so.
Right, because we know who's the boss. Next slide, please. The Lakewood Cemetery platform was completed. With much thanks to Keith Anderson and Dennis Stevens. Dennis did, I think, the majority of the work on it. And it's a major improvement now, both for Memorial Day operations and for Pumpkin Patch. And it also, if you're a new operator and you were all stressed out trying to go and put the door on that little bitty step stool, now you've got like a 45 feet or so of platform to put the front door on, and it's going to be much easier. And we also went and replaced the sidewalk across. Now we got the car swap of 265 and 1239 done. And this was a rare opportunity to see these two cars together on the track at the same time out at Excelsior. I lost all kinds of sleep on this. All I could think about late at night was he'll turn the corner too fast and the car will fall off the trailer. It'll slide off the back. We'll hit an overhead sign or a bridge or something. None of those things happened. In fact, what did happen was that as we were easing down the ramp, the angle between the truck and the ramp was too steep and we scraped. And that happened with both cars. But other than that, everything went well. Next. This is not as good a picture as it should be. The grounds crew at Lake Harriet went up and cleaned off all the vegetation on the retaining wall. Now, by the way, the retaining wall dates from 1916. And so it's 102 years old, 103 this year. And that is not as good as it got. It got better than that, but that was the only photo I had. So it was really quite a job cleaning it off. We also finally gave in and put up fencing around the lake side of the Isaac's car barn because we just kept getting graffitied. And so, you know, it was fairly expensive to do, but now we're not going to have any graffiti anymore. Next. The Linden Hills Depot garden progresses. Ben Porter and his wife have been working on that along with some other people. And what we did is we actually hired a contractor to clean off all of the ballast and fabric that was on top of the north half of the garden, because doing that manually was just a big hassle. So that's all cleaned off now, and the north half of the garden should probably get planted this year. Next. I didn't have another picture. Well, we got a library working group started. And we got a couple of these guys here. Brian Long, if you can raise your hand, and I see Gordy Moore is in the back. Not with us is a new member named Jamie Height, but this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, is to actually get a library working group. And so we've started, we've had a few meetings. We're cataloging, we finished cataloging all the car cards that weren't cataloged. We are now going to start cataloging the three-dimensional objects and do some other things. Among other things, we're going to be getting rid of all the stored paper mini-gazettes and just have a couple of 3 sets that we can keep. So look for somebody that, but it's the Russ Olson Library. That's Russ in the doorway. Russ isn't moving around very much, but we're still in touch with him because nobody knows it better than Russ. Increased Facebook presence. We decided it was time to try to do some online marketing. We had made a decision back when we started that we weren't going to spend money on advertising because we don't have enough money to make an impact. But now with social media, the whole game has changed, and you can do a lot for very little. And so Alexandra Howes went and did kind of an analysis for us, and we decided to do a couple of things. One was just to try to increase our Facebook presence and bring more people, have more people following the museum and learning about us, so that maybe A, they will come out and take a ride, B, maybe they'll volunteer. And so Rose Aarons has been putting up stuff on Facebook, you know, our events and things like that. But Brian Long volunteered to put up the history posts. So have any of you been looking at him, by the way? He's putting up more than one a week. And it'll be a historic photo. Where is this? He'll have an historic photo with a modern day of the same thing. He's put up system maps. And I can tell you that the number of followers, we had 1,676 followers before. That has gone up 10% since he started, and it's really starting to pick up a little momentum. So if any of you are on Facebook, what I'd like you to do, if you could, is to share his Facebook posts with everybody who are on your list, because that's how this stuff spreads. And we're hoping to just have it's not costing us anything, we're hoping to have a better presence. Now, the other thing that we're looking to do, we're not ready for that yet. The other thing we're looking to do is go after group sales. And so Rod Eaton has put together some material for senior residences, and we're going to go and start doing a mailing because, I mean, we got a lot of capacity, whether it's in charters or it's on our regular service. And if we can get some of the groups like senior centers, daycares, that sort of thing to come out more, we know that a lot of people simply don't know about us. The next slide, and this is a fun project that Bill Graham and Rod took on. We've been way short of real interior car cards for both Winona 10 and Car 265. We had a couple, 3 for Car 265, and we were able to use a few of the Twin City ones, like, you know, stay at the Nicollet Hotel if you're from Duluth. But for the most part, we were using these generics that we bought from the Association of Railway Museums that came out of Illinois. And so what Bill Graham did was, now that you can search newspapers online, with the help of the Winona Historical Society, he got access to the historic Winona newspapers, and then he got access to the Duluth newspapers. Now, the ads back in the day, for the most part, didn't have graphics, but they had text. And so what he did is he found text for a whole series of real Duluth and Winona businesses, and then Rod went and added the graphics. And so I've just put 4 of them up here just to give you an idea, and these are going in the cars now. Go ahead. There, save your wife. Winona Wet Wash. And I think there's one more, Warner's Safe Remedies, which probably were not safe. And so, you know, a really fine project. And so when you're on these cars now, I think we're going to have an explanatory sign saying these are not, you know, real ads in terms of the graphics, but they are real ads in terms of the text, the businesses, and it gives you, I think, a better feel. Now, I think, okay. Looking ahead for 2019, here's what I see happening. Number one, Winona 10 and 1300's motors have to get repaired. That is our number one priority. And we're going to be running 1300 with either 2 or 3 motors until that gets done. Now, once again, Dick is going to talk about this more, so I'm giving an overview of some of these things. But we have to get that done. It's going to be expensive, but we have the money. We can do it. 1239's truck overhaul has started. The motors are gone. However, they're backed up now behind 1300's motor. Tech upgrades, and I don't know, Ben, you may, I may not have this right, but we are going to, I don't know, you want to address that instead of my saying it wrong?
Sure.
Go ahead.
We're making some changes to try and make our bookkeeper Tim's life a little bit easier, particularly as we've seen more going to credit card sales. The workload for him has gone up. So starting in the fall, we started working on some solutions to just consolidate the information that we're getting from the daily sales reports and things to make that a little more reliable for him. We also had our point of sale system at Como Harriet fail in right before the Holly Trolley, so we did a rush replacement for that. Luckily, we'd already been looking at some potential replacements, so that's in place. And ESL, as part of that, will be using the same type of system, although without a few of the bells and whistles for their sales as well. So they'll be able to take credit cards. And then our membership database, something we've been working on getting upgraded for quite a long time, is also well underway. We did most of the conversion of that in November and just about ready to finish that up.
Okay. And Mr. McCulloch has volunteered to be our new membership secretary or membership manager. Where are you, Steve? That's not. Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I? Not. That's not you. No. I'm sorry. You're building and grounds now. Who? Bill Way. Oh my gosh. My apologies. I'm on the previous version of it. I didn't upgrade my file. Okay. We are hoping, Tom Schramm, we're hoping that the new speeder is done this year.
Not a problem.
Okay. This is the new electric speeder, which the Rod and Custom Shop over at the Como Harriet Barn is turning into. It may have flames on it. It will have comfortable seating. I think there's a hot tub. It's everything you'd ever want an electric speeder to be. And when that is done, then little ETS-1 will go out to Excelsior, and then the plan is to sell the gas speeder. The garden planting should get done, the last half of the garden at Lake Harriet. Solar-powered streetcars. There will not be solar panels on the roofs of the streetcars. But Ross Hammond, longtime member who is an energy consultant, has been working on this now for a couple of years and has been rather frustrated. You've probably been hearing of community solar, where they're building big solar arrays kind of in the counties around the fringe of the Twin Cities. And you can subscribe and buy your power as solar. Well, that's available to us, and we signed up. And the problem has been that the firm we signed up with hasn't gotten their solar gardens done. And so we're hoping this will finally happen this year. When it does happen, not only can we brag that our streetcars are powered by solar energy, but it should cut our bill by a few $100 a year. So it's a win-win. 500 plus new photos on Minnesota Reflections. Those of you who know about Minnesota Reflections, this is the website where government funded, works through the University of Minnesota and St. Cloud State and the Historical Society. And this is where all the small museums and institutions can get their photos digitized and then keyword searchable online. And we've had almost 2,000 of them on for a number of years. There's 150 institutions and 150,000 photos on there, and it gets bigger every year. Well, I went back and did another project, and sometime this year, probably in the middle of the year, we're going to have another, I think it's 570 or so of our photos up online there. Brian Long has been doing the metadata for that. Matter of fact, we'll have to talk afterwards and see how you're coming with it. But that's going to be up in a little bit. Streetcar internal wiring, I'm not going to, once again, I don't understand it. Ben, I think you and Carl Jones are the culprits on this, so what are we doing with that?
We're starting with 1300. We're changing the overhead lighting system and headlight system in the car to 120-volt power for safety purposes mostly.
And this is because we've had a couple of small ceiling fires due to the lighting wiring in 1300 and in 265. We caught them both. They didn't, but they could have burned the cars down. And that's what we don't need to have happen. So that's the reason for this project. Next slide. Vintage video programs. Over the last few years, I've compiled over 2 hours of vintage Minnesota, vintage Twin Cities and Duluth streetcar footage. And I've had it digitized, but the problem is that because it comes from a whole bunch of sources, it's in very random order. And I've wanted to go and create programs. Originally, we were thinking, oh, back in the VCR days, we were going to go and put together a tape and sell it, but that's not how it's done anymore. Now we want to have programs and put them on YouTube. And this summer I was working the streetcar at Lake Harriet, and a gentleman named Bill Oxley came and rode. And I struck up a conversation with him, and he's a videographer professionally. And he said, I would be happy to help you go and get these videos into shape. And so I've now had 2 sessions with him. It's going to take a while longer because what we're doing right now is simply putting the video in geographic order. And then once it's put in geographic order, I'm going to turn that into some programs, and we're going to get them on YouTube. And there will be something up by the end of the year. I'm quite confident of it. But I'm really pleased that this is happening finally. Fargo Moorhead 28 moved to new storage. And Dick, why don't you just tell them about that? Because that's the, I'm not quite clear on all the details.
Fargo Moorhead 28 is a Bernie car that we've had stored at Ken Albrecht's farm in North Mankato for a number of years. And for a number of reasons, we're going to be moving that car to Carbody. Our plan is to actually move it to Excelsior, to the ESL barn. And along with moving the Saba 10 around, we're going to be able to store that in the back of the barn until we're ready to actually start the restoration of that. For those, we just found out recently that Ken Albrecht, who was the lead on the Winona 10 restoration, is now in a memory care unit, unfortunately, and so his children are in the process of divesting some of the property, and the barn that Fargo Moorhead 28 is in is going to be sold to a neighbor of Ken's. So that's the reason for having to move it out. We have to get it out of there before the first hay gets taken off the fields, because that's what this new owner is going to be using it for. And we have things in progress. I've made several, I asked for quotes from a couple of different companies to actually move the car barn, or the car body, I should say, and they have to get down there and take a look at it to actually make the complete bid on it. But that's what's going to be happening with Fargo Moorhead 28. So it won't be restored right away, but we will be starting to work on it in the near future.
And along with that, doesn't Ken have a fair number of parts down there as well? Or did we get them already?
Actually, Aaron,
okay.
We pretty much took everything out of there that we knew we had for the Winona 10, the seats and everything like that. And when we were down there last fall to look at the car body, we really didn't see much in the way of actual parts that we had, or that we could identify. But he may have some in another barn too.
Okay.
I was gonna say, we got enough of the brill seats for the car, the winter seats. So they're somewhere there in North Mankato. It's not in the machine shed in one of the other buildings that Ken has.
Scott?
Yeah, I've been talking with Don, who's kind of like the property manager for Ken down there, now that Ken's in memory care, and he's a very close friend of Ken's, and of course is working with Ken's kids. But he said there's about a pickup truck, back of a pickup truck amount of parts and stuff down there, besides the Fargo Moorhead 28 body. So when we go down there, we're just gonna have to plan on, loading some stuff up.
All right. Let's see. Car event reimagined. Now, what that means, first, I need to preface that Rod Eaton, who has been our impresario and Mr. Events, as said he'd like to try to start backing off from some of this and not have to be there every day for everything. I don't know, Rod, how you want to characterize it or not. What are you saying?
A good summary.
Okay. And so we want, if there is anybody who wants to start taking a more active role in planning and managing any of these events, please step forward. But we do have one volunteer, and Gordy Moore, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We have the event called the Owl Car, which was really kind of a redo of the Moonlight Ride, but it's been kind of a quiet event, and we have several of them planned. But Gordy has had the idea of trying to do something in terms of a Facebook event. And Gordy, I don't know if you're comfortable telling people what you had on your mind or if you've got some ideas, but we've handed him the Owl event and said, see what you can do with this. You have anything to add to that or what?
Okay, good morning, extemporaneous speaking. Hi, everybody. I'm Gordy Moore. I haven't met many of you. I've met some of you. So Rod and I have yet to talk in person, so we're going to, so I won't go too far forward in saying anything. But basically, I think something that would be very useful in terms of this event and some of our special events is making recurring Facebook events that folks in the public can see on Facebook. And it's very clear with those that they're paid events. But for example, our friends at the Minnesota Transportation Museum made a recurring event last winter for their like night trains where they let people come and it's all lit up with their setup there. And that garnered a huge amount of interest. Hundreds of people said they're interested, thousands, and went to that. So something like that as a base level in terms of promoting, having that on Facebook, having it seen throughout the season so people can see the dates in the future and getting that out to the younger crowd of people. So that's just one thing in terms of actually promoting it. In terms of what it can look like, Rod and I have to talk in person. We've been emailing back and forth a little bit, but I hope that we can grow the events and get some more interest, especially among younger people who are maybe more likely to be up at the later hours. I know there's more young people who are trained and transit nerds than you would expect. There's some local Facebook groups that are into that, but I don't think anybody knows about this event. I had never heard of it until I started volunteering last year, so I think there's a lot of potential there for Owl Service. And you might have seen with the calendar this year, there's going to be one in September, which I thought would be good just to add one more. So that will be in progress.
Right, and so because this is an event that had been sort of marginal in terms of attendance, we got nothing to lose here. So I think this is going to be a really interesting exercise, if you will, in event marketing. Next item, 44th Street history signs will be installed. You know the signs that we've got along the right-of-way at Lake Harriet that have a photo, a vintage photo where you're looking at the same thing today. There's a dozen of them. You may not have seen them all, but there are a dozen of them. There's one at the top of the steps leading down to the car barn and all that. Well, the Linden Hills Neighborhood Council paid for those signs, and they approached me this summer. There is a move to try to do more with the trolley right-of-way along the parallels 44th Street from Upton Avenue west to Chowan Avenue. 2 blocks of that have been turned into a very nice trolley path with landscaping and sidewalks, but there's more of it that could be added. And so they called me up and they said, we'd like to see about getting history signs along there. So the signs have been made, they've paid for them, and I'm right now talking, well, it got stopped here while winter happened, but now that spring is here, we're talking to the city about where we can post them because this is city right-of-way and we need their approval to do it. So the signs are done, and whenever the city gives us some kind of an okay, we'll put them up sometime this summer. So that'll be something more to look at. And by the way, we are credited along with the Linden Hills Neighborhood Council on every one of the signs. I mentioned before with our library group, we're going to get the 3-dimensional artifacts that we have cataloged. There are not that many of them, but it'll be good to finally do it. And then this I think I actually can call on Steve McCulloch for. We've had kind of a drainage problem on those rear steps going down into the basement of the Linden Hills Depot, and I know that you've been working on a fix for that. And so what were you thinking?
Well, we've got one. We've got the materials, but winter got in the way, so we didn't get it finished. So we're going to put in a French drain by that door to the water doesn't pond there when it
Okay.
rains.
Okay. So anyway, these were all the things I could think of. As other people report, if I've forgotten anything, you know, please come forward. Yeah, Steve.
We need to complete the landscaping on the north end
Ah, yes. Up by the platform. Forgot about that. And we're also, John Dillery is, we're also going to have some additional informational signage on our schedules and when we're running up on the north platform to try to, eliminate some of the, hey, I'm standing here, but is the car really running, or when is it going to get here, and all that. So, and at some point, I imagine we'll have GPS on the streetcars, and then they'll know in real time. But until then, we're going to use paper. Right. Okay. That concludes my report. First, any questions for me? Yes.
Yeah, as long as you're talking about drainage problems, we have severe drainage problems at the maintenance barn in that periodically, due to the snow melt, the inspection pit fills, and it fills to a degree that is 4 or 5 inches deep. We see Simon loaned us a sump pump to pump part of it out, and I wet vacuumed the bottom part of it, but it would be nice if we could arrange to have some sort of drain at the front of the carbine doors to absorb a lot of the snow melt. At present, or at least as of last Tuesday, the 1239 was frozen in place due to the ice on the rails and around the lead truck. So something needs to be done about that.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, Jim?
You skipped over the.
What did I skip on?
Saba 10.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's probably, Howie Melko said, we need to have, so he said we have to keep this Winona 10 crew together. We don't want to lose all these people. And so the first project was them fixing up the store area and all. But he said what we really should do is do something with Masaba 10, and by something, clean it out, make it possible for people to go through and look at it, and then start a cosmetic restoration of it, which is probably a very long-term sort of a thing. But one, it will go and introduce it. It'll make it one more attraction within the barn, and number two, we'll start to get some progress on Masaba 10. And he's also interested in doing some more history displays in the ESL car barn. But I hadn't talked to Howie recently, so I wasn't quite up to date on where he's at with that.
That's about where he's at.
Okay, all right, very good. Yes.
You might mention that Howie's also asked you if it would be all right to shift track 3 there, so street cars can actually go in and out of it, like we did on track 1 and 2, and also finish the concrete floor in them.
Yeah, it's been, as far as I know, we don't have, I don't think we have the concrete floor in the budget this year, but it's definitely coming. And at the same time, of course, you want the track to get shifted so it'll work. But yeah, I think that's probably a next year thing. Okay, we now have reports by museum officers, and the first one is Jim Vaikunas. And do we have any kind of PowerPoint associated with you, or, okay, so Ben is going to find it.
Bringing it up now.
All right. There we go.
Gosh.
Is that the one?
Yeah, I'm going to take.
Oh, okay, that's right. We're recording this, so
Oh, I'm wired?
Yeah.
All right. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, in my role as wearing several hats, one of them is just basic interface with governmental entities like the state and to some extent the feds. I don't have much contact with the local people, but whatever we had to do, including what Chris has been doing with the tax returns with the IRS. We have met all the timelines in 2018. One of my hats is insurance. And there's not a lot of activity, luckily, with the insurance. But this breakout here shows you basically that we pay just a little over $10,000 a year for all of our insurance requirements. And if you have any questions, please call me. Raise your hand. It's pretty basic. It was hardly any change between 2017 and 2018. And this year's insurance is just slightly more, but not by much, maybe a couple of $100. Okay, just a breakdown on membership. And as you can see from that top chart, we've been floating between 310, 320 over the last 5 years. We had a big influx of lifetimes when we raised all of our dues. And we raised the lifetime memberships from 500 to 750, and we had a significant number of people that decided to take advantage of the discount prior to the 1 May cutoff. Next slide. Okay, annual election we will hold in just a bit. We had two vacancies. The incumbents agreed to continue. We did not get any nominations from the membership, so when we call for the vote, it'll be pretty much acclamation. We had 4 board meetings, and I just want to remind you that if you're interested in what we talk about in our board meetings, just go to our website, because we've got the full minutes with all the enclosures, mostly reports from Chris, our treasurer, and also from Bruce and from Todd, too, on what they're doing. So if you want to see the nitty-gritty details, that's the place to go. Pardon me?
It says 2017. 2018?
Yeah, that's 2018. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just took last year's slides and updated it, but I didn't catch that one. Thank you, Brian. I guess the big news is we did revise our bylaws to correct some problems that were associated with it, and also to bring it into the 21st century, and that was approved by the board. And Ben mentioned our new membership thing, database. You can now renew by going online and pushing all the buttons, and you can renew online using your credit card rather than sending a stamp in. But one thing I would say is that to save time, particularly now that Bill Way has taken over as the membership services guru, when you do get your notice, and you still will get a notice in the mail to renew, please, just go on and do it then. It's only $40, or I guess $60 now. 40 individuals, 60 for a family per year. And go on and get it over with, so we don't have to send you a reminder and all that stuff. The other thing I don't have on there that we've noticed over the last several months is people have changed their addresses and failed to tell us. So when that happens, the post office for a year will forward the mail. However, they'll also tell us that of the new address, and we have to pay 60 cents for the privilege of being informed. Now, it doesn't amount to much, $2, $3 a year, but you know, it'd be nice to have you let us know just as soon as there's a change in your address. And unless we have any questions, that concludes my report.
All right. The next will be the treasurer's report. And Chris, come up and...
Thanks.
Want to do it from there? That's fine.
Sure. All right, some quick introductory remarks. So I may be the person sitting up here delivering this report, but by far the bulk of the work that happens financially for the museum is done by Tim Crane, our bookkeeper. So I'd like to have a special mention and thank you. Yes, thank you, Tim. The other group of people who do a lot are our cashiers, led by Bill Ahrens. That's a daily task in the summertime, and something I don't see a lot of, but it really matters to the numbers you see here. To also carry on with what Jim said, financially the museum has 3 major tasks a year. The first comes up in early February, where we have to pay sales tax to the state of Minnesota for all of the taxable items that we sold the previous year. Some businesses do that monthly or quarterly. We do it yearly. So that was taken care of in early February. Tim is actively working on the IRS Form 990, which is our annual sort of tax filing with the IRS, similar to how you have to file your individual income taxes. And we also are working on the Secretary of State's report, which is filed to the state of Minnesota, which essentially is a copy of the Form 990 with a few extra details added. Those are not due until May. They're pretty close to being done, and I anticipate those will be filed on time. So, next slide. So in 2018, we had 4 major capital expenses. First was the restoration of Winona number 10, the Isaacs Carbarn East Fence, the Como Harriet New North platform, and the number 1239 truck rebuild. So that is the money that was spent on those projects last year. So in 2019, we have proposed in the budget to the board, which will be discussed and I hope ultimately approved after the general member meeting, repair to the motors on numbers 1239, 1300, which Aaron talked about, a new tower car for Como Harriet. That's necessitated by the likely eventual move of Winona 10 to Como Harriet, which will take up all of the space on the cold barn side, necessitating the overhead equipment being stored in the new barn on the south side of the building, and that ceiling and entrance is too low for our existing tower car. Aaron has been working with, who's the museum? To build a Baker heater that would be very similar to the one that was originally in 1239. Ben talked about 1239 and 1300 electrical upgrades, and there is additional money yet to be spent on 1239 truck rebuild. As far as the cash balances, the remainder of my report focuses on trends largely, since at least to me I find that very helpful. I don't really know why the cash balances at the end of 2015 were so low. That predates my time as treasurer, but that is what I.
The number looks wrong.
Yeah, it was in the financial report submitted at the annual meeting. So I'm inclined to believe it's correct, but I don't have the information to back it up. But you can see we have been pretty steady the last few years. The one thing I'll add is that our budget process tends to be quite conservative, and I don't necessarily anticipate that we will draw down our cash reserves as much as this indicates. For instance, in 2018, for the proposed budget, I think we proposed drawing it down to something just under $300,000, and that was not the case due to our income and donations. So the next 4 slides are looking at income and expenses on a historical basis, and the chart's looking at it presented in 2 different ways. It's the same data, just presented 2 different ways. So you can look at the operational income history and see what our income has been from operational related activities for the last 4 years. 2019 obviously has an asterisk since it's a proposed budget and has not yet happened. But you can see that donations and fairs and to some degree special events make up the vast majority of our income. So that's where our money's coming from.
Can I just comment? The reason in 2016 and 2017 is you're seeing the really large state grant. We got $115,000 from the state of Minnesota for 1,300. We're not going to see that kind of thing happen very often, so that's why there's a bubble there.
So again, this is the same data as the last chart, but it's showing you how, I guess the categories didn't make it on here, but it's showing you how those things vary from year to year. So donations, fairs, charter, special events, merchandise sales, member dues, and other. Other incorporates a lot of stuff. There's too much for me to break it out individually on a chart that you can look at and make sense of, but it's everything from office supplies to our membership in the Excelsior Chamber of Commerce and things like that. So the good news you can see, as Aaron mentioned, donations were way up in 2016, 2017, but to a large degree our income is pretty steady by source. So again, we're moving on to expenses now. You can see repairs account for a lot. Other, again, it encompasses a lot of different stuff. And it's not easily possible for me to break it out. That being said, I do have a copy of the cash balances report and the 2019 budget. I have a limited copy of those, so if you'd like to see them, peruse them, I can give it to you here. You're welcome to email me, or as Aaron mentioned, all this stuff is on our website as well. Same thing as last time. I guess some of the categories down at the bottom are not fully displaying, but it's the same ones as the last chart. Again, showing that basically each of these expense categories is roughly the same from year to year. Repairs and maintenance, we are consciously spending a bit more on compared to past years. There's a number of shop tools that have been requested, a number of parts, brake shoes, that sort of thing that we need, and the budget committee, which consists of me, Aaron, Bruce, and Keith Anderson, who wasn't able to be here today, met and discussed that basically all of those budget requests were worthwhile. And I think this is my last slide. I also thought it kind of interesting to look at where these income and expenses come from. This is not perfect, I will grant you that. In our accounting system, we basically break everything down into one of three classes. So we have class 10 for Como Harriet, class 20 for Excelsior, and class 30 for the museum overall. So there is some stuff that gets lumped in the museum overall that could be put elsewhere, but by nature of the bills we receive and where it comes from, it's not easy for Tim to necessarily assign every discrete expense to the right spot. So this is a little difficult to read, I admit, but it's I really couldn't think of a better way to put it. So the first two bars in each year are income versus expenses for Como Harriet. The second two bars are income versus expense for Excelsior. So you can see Como Harriet, does quite well every year. Excelsior in the last few years has unfortunately lost a little money, although last year or 2 years ago it was about break even. Last year it turned around, and we're hoping for 2019 that'll be even better.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make. I think the emphasis at ESL by Todd and Karen and Jim and all the volunteers
Absolutely.
to promote the special events and to really manage that operation well. That is an excellent trend. I like it.
Absolutely.
Questions for Chris? All right. Okay, at this point, we have to have a vote to approve his report. So, is there a motion?
Chairman, I hereby move that the MSM Treasurer's annual financial report be approved as a form of content.
Is there a second? Second. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Okay, next we're going to go to the General Superintendent's report.
Okay, let Ben open it up. So please ask any questions as we go along here. So in 2018, we had 113 active operators who contributed hours. This resulted in about 2,700 hours at Como Harriet and 1,000 hours at Excelsior. These statistics are very comparable to what we've seen in both 2017 and 2016. Training led by Dave Higgins, we started 26 members or 26 volunteers. We graduated 18. Again, the 18 compares to about 16 that we've seen in the prior 2 years. I'll wait just a second. as it's coming up, or the new operators, which we're going to show on the list here, several of which are in the building, contribute about 10%, 370 hours, about 10% of the total museum hours. That 10% is about what we see every year, but again, I'd like to specifically thank those new volunteers for contributing a significant portion of the overall time. The building activity, Aaron kind of went through most of the ones that are up there. The only other thing kind of note is that there was a significant roof repairs both at Como Harriet and Excelsior, and some electrical upgrades at Excelsior. The next two slides go into a little more detail on the performance at Como Harriet, then I'll touch on Excelsior. At Como Harriet in 2018, we served about 27,000 riders. That's an 18% drop from the prior year, about 6,000 riders. It's the second year in a row where we've seen meaningful reductions. In 2018, weather, as we generally have, weather was a little stronger of an impact in 2018 for two reasons. One is shown on the slide there. We had 9 weather-related days as opposed to kind of an average of 6 or 7 the prior years. And it was the timing of the weather days. So if you can recall, we had inclement weather on Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Winternacht. Those 3 events at Como Harriet represented about 1,100 riders. And so that literally those 3 days represent somewhere between a fifth and a sixth of the overall drop. The other thing of note, and you can see it a little bit on the graph at the bottom, July was significantly weaker. We had 4 rain days in July. In 2017, we had none. And July tends to be one of our heavier months. So again, weather's not the only indicator of lower performance, but it is a significant one. I think the work that Aaron mentioned earlier around the group marketing activities and the Facebook work is one of the things, there are a couple of things we're trying to do to sort of change the impact we've seen over the last couple of years on overall ridership. I think that's, the only other thing I want to call out is that this is in terms of riders. This is not in terms of ticket sales, right? So we have about 20 to 25% of our riders don't have tickets, so they could have passes, they could be children. If you look back at the slides that Chris showed, that while the overall ridership dropped 18%, the passenger revenue dropped about 8%. So it's still a drop, but not quite as significant as shown here in the ridership statistics. The next slide shows Excelsior. And again, Excelsior served about just slightly under 7,000 riders, had a drop about 8% from prior year. Again, the impact on the ridership wasn't as significant, in part due to the great work that Todd and Karen do on these special events. So the special events a much bigger impact at Excelsior, and the drop, actually some of the special event ridership actually was strong year over year. I've also included in the upper right-hand corner a chart that Todd has created in the past I think is really informative. The red, yellow, green indicates the top 3 years for performance. Green is the number 1, yellow is number 2, red is the number 3. What's really interesting is in the last 3 years, most of the strong performance has happened in the last 3 years. And that's attributable to the fact that that's when ESL went from a 2-person crew to a 3-person crew. And as Karen told me that I think was really insightful, is that third person is basically in the ticket booth that allows people to know that the streetcar's running. So in the past where you had the streetcar not there for a significant portion of the operation, nobody knew that the car was actually running. Now you have somebody there that can engage them, that can sell them tickets, and so you see a meaningful boost to ridership. I think John's idea of putting a sign up at the north end will have probably not nearly as meaningful, simply because we don't get that many riders there, but it's sort of the same idea of it can't hurt, thank you, John, of trying to inform people that the car is running at that time. The next slide is, again, sort of a summary of operations. This is now looking at 2019. For Como Harriet, we will not have any changes to the schedule. So we're going to stick with the schedule that we've had the last couple of years, with the PCC car running on Thursday night and on, excuse me, first shift on Sunday. As always, we need PCC operators, so if you are interested in, please contact Chris Heck, and we will be arranging PCC training sometime in May. I will point out that I'm going to send out an ops newsletter, so there's going to be a lot more detail on what's covered here around the timing of our training, contacts, et cetera. ESL, we have made one small change. We are moving the Sunday shift from 12:30 to 3. The consensus was that there really wasn't enough riders at the kind of the end of the shift to have it make sense to keep it open that extra hour, and by pushing it forward a little bit, we hope to grab people a little bit earlier in the day. Non-operating activities, Aaron previously mentioned Rod's fine work, so again, I want to call that out. We will, during the course of the year, be looking for new volunteers to pick up some of the other events, and we'll, again, through the ops newsletter, some other communication, identify what those particular events are. Primarily, we're looking at the ones that are kind of later in the year, the Halloween, Christmas type activities. I did want to call out Steve McCulloch for volunteering to pick up the building maintenance activity from Pat Kriske, who over the last several years has done a phenomenal job, but thank you to Steve. Also, I'd be remiss by not pointing out that we have a number of non-operating positions or activities that need volunteers. So if you are interested and able, we would love to have you help with the car cleaning at both Como Harriet and Excelsior. The groundwork that Aaron again mentioned, Steve has done a great job at Como Harriet. We need volunteers for that, and we also need volunteers for the groundwork out at Excelsior. Car maintenance also is one. So we'll again be looking for volunteers throughout the course of the year for these other operating positions. The last slide I have is around training. Training is going to be very similar to what we've done the last couple of years. So there's a recertification process. We'll kick it off. Actually, the one change we're going to do with the recertification is we're going to send out the tests electronically this year. We're going to send them out early. So they're probably going to go out in the next week or so. And we'll ask you to fill those out. We'll have them submitted back in. We still will have the foreman meetings and the operator meetings, but by doing the recertification test outside of it, we'll be able to talk more about the results and not have to spend kind of everybody's collective time actually just filling out the form. The recertification process, again, will be similar to prior years. You will be deactivated in shift planning until you recertify. All second-year operators and all Como Harriet operators who had less than 10 years will need to do a recertification test as well. 10 hours, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah.
By the way, Bruce, can we add in that we also have to learn the new point of sale?
Yes. Yes. So Rose Aarons will be doing, thank you, Rose, will doing point of sale training for all Como Harriet operators. At Excelsior, because of the change in the cars, we're going to require all operators to recertify at Excelsior. So since we have 265 out there, we want to make sure everybody's comfortable with both cars. Okay, I think that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Can you talk a bit about our charter activities in 2018?
So the charter activities, actually, as was on the initial slide, the charter activities went about 4%. So it was a meaningful boost, but it not, so I'll say it this way, Steve, charter activities continues to grow. I think there's still more opportunities, as Aaron talked about, the group activity up front. The prior year was really kind of a historic low, and so the pickup is getting us back to kind of where we were, I think, in 2016. Other questions? Jerry and Muriel do a phenomenal job in managing the Como Harriet charter activity. Again, there's a group of dedicated volunteers that really do the bulk of the operations of those that also do a phenomenal job. Bill?
I'd like to comment on that. The number of operators that are available to work charters is not that large. So if there's anybody, any of the operators who are willing to do that, let Jerry know that he can put them on the list to help with charters.
Thank you, Bill. Scott?
Yeah, I would like to lead a round of applause for Jerry and Muriel for the fine work they've been doing for many years on charters, and it's an important part of our operation.
questions? Jim?
One thing to add to Bruce's prior slide about needing some help. We are in the preliminary stages, being led by Keith Anderson, myself, and Chris Heck, in doing a complete evaluation of the overhead at Lake Harriet. That overhead has had no meaningful maintenance since around 2000, 2001. What work has been done has always been to fix problems that have occurred in the process of normal operations. So what we want to, and this is going to be a multi-year process that will probably involve hiring a contractor to do some of the heavy-duty work, like replacing line poles. At this stage in the game, geezers like myself and Scott and others really can't climb up on tower cars anymore, at least not safely, and can't be screwing around with 30-foot wooden poles that weigh 400 or 500 pounds each. But some of the work can be done by our guys to save money, very similar to the work our guys did on the 1239 truck project. That's all I want to say about that whole concept at the moment. I will send something out to all the members in, this coming week explaining what's going on with that. But on the 6th of April, we are going to have a walk of the right-of-way of Como Harriet, hopefully with the new speeder, to do a complete inventory, pole by pole, of what's on the overhead. And that'll be a starting point. If you'd like to join us and learn a little bit more about the mysteries and intricacies of the celestial knitting that keeps our streetcars going, please join us.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, our next report is Todd Bender for Excelsior Streetcar Line.
Yes, I only have one slide up there, if you can go ahead and advance to it. And for those who haven't been out to Excelsior in a while, or if you haven't been out there at all, this is what our store and display area currently looks like. And I want to point out that it's very open, well lit, cleaned, well stocked, and it's a very inviting space for people to come out and visit our car barn during the car barn tours, and also people who are just actually walking down the trails and the restoration crews there. They like to pop in and see what's going on out here at Excelsior. And what I'm going to point out is, how do we get to this point? This is all a result of probably about 3 to 4 years of concentrated effort and investment into the car barn that includes such things as track 2 realignment, the installation of a concrete floor over 2/3 of the coal barn. There's still more that needs to be done, but we got 2/3 of it done. Security upgrades, electrical upgrades, lighting upgrades, installation of Wi-Fi. All these things have been going on, and that's not all that exciting. But now you can really see that we're starting to pull this all together and starting to overhaul our store area. And that has a huge impact because we have Karen Kurtzman, who has been really taking things, charge of the store, working with Lake Harriet as well to increase our inventory, make sure we have things properly displayed. And then also the restoration crew, who when they find time have really stepped up and brought their ideas to what they like to do, and also provide the muscle for doing the installation. One thing is, if you look at the cork board there, we have this cork board so we can dynamically update the displays, which we plan to update this year. I was just talking to Karen, now that we have Duluth 265, we want to put together a nice display, really emphasizing 78 and 265 and parts of what these cars did and when they operate, and it's part of the Duluth information. We can do that because of the cork board. Well, the restoration crew said, well, we'll help you install the cork board. I thought they just put it on the walls. Well, they did, and then they went and they overhauled and dressed the walls up to even look to have the colors and the look of the streetcars, which really makes a nice display. Plus, they also went and we had the stairway that used to be right next to the display cases we have. I don't know if you kind of see it. It's, right now you can't really see it because it's been lifted up, and that's their work again. They went and they redesigned the stairs so they can be lifted out of the way most of the time, really opening up and lining up the area. And so I just wanted to point out that all this investment we've been putting into the Excelsior car barn is really starting to pay off. And also, we're not done yet. We still have more ideas. And Aaron touched upon the Masaba 10, just kind of static restoration.
And part of the ideas we have is to really get that out in the open so that people can see these displays, and they can also see this interactive display of Masaba 10 and see what we're doing with restoration, start seeing this car come together, and be able to see and touch and see, get more an idea of what we actually do out at Excelsior. So this is where we're at now. We've made a lot of progress over the past 3 to 4 years, and there are more ideas, and we got more changes coming in the near future as well. Now, I may have missed some things. I don't know if anyone has any comments, Karen or Scott, because there's been a lot of other work of people doing grounds and air fun stuff too out at Excelsior, but there's a lot of exciting stuff happening now, and more to come. Question?
Congratulate everyone, Karen and Jim and Todd and everyone who's worked on dressing up that car barn. It was kind of a dungeon for a long time, and it's very nice now, and I think you get a round of thanks for that.
Thanks. And I will point out that a lot of this goes to Karen and the restoration crew. My biggest contributing factor to all this is basically they come up with these great ideas, and I say, go for it. And just get out of the way and let them do it. That's what I like too. Scott.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that Todd Bender's biggest job out there, the thing he spends most of his time on, is cutting all the grass on the whole line. He's out there a tremendous amount of time this summer doing that. And that's why we need a grounds person out there specifically to find some other volunteers and so forth, so Todd has more time to rest.
I'm also one responsible for the lawnmower blade getting all dinged up because I do tend to run a little low when I cut the grass, so sorry about that.
All right. Next, Mr. Wacky.
Just clip this. Great. Good Lord. Somehow. Good Lord. Yeah, it's a good thing. We'll just start with the general thing. As Aaron has mentioned already, our biggest off-season event was to swap the 2 cars, 265 and 1239, between Como Harriet and Excelsior. I had the privilege of riding in the truck that was actually moving the 2 cars, the flatbed, and you get a real different look at things when you ride up in the cab of that semi, and you realize that those streetlights are a little bit lower than you really think they are, and you have to be a little careful about the clearance that you have with all the overhead signs. But that was a lot of fun, and again, thanks to Aaron for coordinating all of that.
For those, that cost us $5,000, which I thought was incredibly reasonable, considering that it was an outfit that came up all the way from Kansas City to do it.
Right. Yeah, and that also involved running the whole route a day beforehand, making sure that everything was they had the correct clearance and everything like that. So there was a lot of work that went in beforehand, other than just being the oh wow when people saw a streetcar being moved down the streets of Minneapolis and Excelsior. The other part of that now is that we now have all 3 examples of the types of streetcars that ran in the Twin Cities at Como Harriet. We have a gate car with 1239, 1300 being front and rear operational doors, and then a PCC. And then also, because of that, we have all of our Duluth cars and our out-of-state cars at Excelsior. So this gives our guests, our patrons, a chance to really see the different types of cars that were there. So I think that's a real great benefit, a side benefit that we get to this. Moving on to some of the specifics, at Como Harriet, as Aaron mentioned, 1300's truck was or both of the trucks were rebuilt. We unfortunately, one of the motors failed on 1300, and so now that motor has been removed and sent out to our motor repair shop here in the Twin Cities, which is L&S Electric. And because of some work of Carl Jones and a number of the other crew at Como Harriet, they are rewiring the car. And in fact, this morning they were hoping maybe to even take 1300 out and test it and confirm that it will operate. I didn't have a chance to stop by there and check the snow conditions on the track to see if they would be able to get the car out, but it's very close to being operational for the season. One of the things that impacts is our training with Dave Higgins. I personally wanted to make sure that we had only one car available for the trainees, so we didn't have to switch them between 1300 and 1239 and add another layer of confusion to some new trainees. So 1300 will be available for the training at Como Harriet, and I think that's a real help for our training. As Ben mentioned, some new LED lighting has been added to the interior of 1300, and it will keep with the same overall look of a vintage streetcar, but it allows us to operate on a 120-volt AC system instead of a 600-volt DC system, and is a much safer way to operate. 1239 has been moved, as we said, and it will be taken out of service for the truck rebuild. One of the other things too about the rebuild of the new platform at the north end of Como Harriet is that we needed that extended platform to be able to operate 1239 at Como Harriet, because it's a gate car and people enter and exit only at the rear end of the car, and so we needed that platform to be rebuilt for that to accommodate 1239 also. The PCC has, because of the rebuild of the 1300s trucks, the PCC hasn't had much maintenance, and with the help of Russ Isbrandt and several other people, that's getting some of the maintenance now that it needs, and it will be ready for the season in 2019. At ESL, as we said, 265 is now available, and it will be there for the 2019 season. We will have to recertify all of the operators on that car because it is a new car for them. 78 is going through some of its maintenance and will be ready for the season. Again, Winona 10, we've had a problem with one of the motors there, and so again, that motor is up at L&S Electric. And I also would say, well, I'll just finish off. We're also completing details on Winona 10, such as adding window bars, completing the shades on the interior of the car, trying to get material that, although it's not vintage material, it'll look like vintage material for the shades, so that we'll keep the feel of the car. We also need to do some detailing of the paint, adding the numbers to the car, and adding some little pinstriping and other little accents to Winona 10. I would also say on the whole thing with the motors, one of the things that has been found with taking the motors apart, both of 1300's motor and Winona 10's motor will need to be rewound. The armature will need to be rewound, and that's a fairly major expense, as you saw from the information that Chris had presented. But there's also, they found that there was some asbestos in the, on those armatures. You know, that's not unreasonable thinking of the age of those motors. The motor out of Winona 10 was probably built around the turn of the century, and I'm not talking 2000. So we have to go through some asbestos abatement procedures with that, and that's not cheap to do. Thankfully, L&S Electric had a big motor out of one of their machines, a mill or a lathe, that also has some asbestos in it. So we were able to piggyback with their work on getting that asbestos taken out of their motor and get all of these done at the same time. Also, we mentioned 1239. We had bought 5 motors from the Halton County Museum in Canada to be able to be reused for the rebuild of 1239's trucks, and those motors are also part of that asbestos abatement too. So we're able to combine a lot of work together, and that's one good thing that's happened. Unfortunately, the motors from Canada, which were really our lowest priority, were the ones that arrived at the motor shop first to be reworked. So we've had to work with them, you know, to realign the priorities. But just this week, we've made some major progress. The asbestos abatement company is going to be in there. Was supposed to be in there this week to take care of the armatures, and so we'll start to get them rewound, and we should be moving forward on that pretty quickly now. So I'm looking forward to that work being done. The work on Mesaba 10, as we've already said, we'll be moving that out of Track 3 at Excelsior, putting it on some temporary trucks, and then moving it on to Track 2. But before that happens, we have to completely, those of you who may have been out at Excelsior and seen what's in and around Mesaba 10, there's a lot of stuff, most people would call it junk, that's in and around Mesaba 10, and that needs to be taken out. We're going to get a temporary storage facility and put that next to the barn and put the needed stuff in there, and then the rest of it we'll scrap or throw away. And that will allow us the opportunity to put Mesaba 10 on the trucks that are currently there, and then move it into Track 2. And as Aaron has said, this will give us the opportunity to do some work on a restoration basis. You know, maybe 2 guys will take over restoring the bathroom that was in the car, so we can give people a chance to see what an interurban car looked like, because it's a different type of car than the street cars that we ran here in the Twin Cities. Along with that, though, as Aaron mentioned, the first thing is we have to make it safe for people to get in and around the car. Right now, the strong back, basically the body or the backbone of the car is not very safe, and so we're going to have to reinforce that and make that safe first, rebuild the steps to get onto the car, and then we can finally start at least having people tour the car and see it for what it is and hopefully what it will be. No guarantees that it will ever be operational, but never say never also. The other thing, we mentioned Fargo-Moorhead 28. We've already talked about the fact that it needs to be moved from North Mankato, and we're working on that. I've gotten a couple of quotes from Rocket Crane and Rigging. It'll be about $5,000 to move that from North Mankato up to the Twin Cities. If we put it in a temporary storage someplace else, we'll have the cost of storage of that, which would be about $3,000 a year. Plus, we'll have to move it a second time from that temporary storage place back to Excelsior. So that's why we really want to move it only once and accommodate it that way. Once we move, we eventually transfer Winona 10 from Excelsior to Como Harriet. We'll have a lot more space in the Excelsior barn also, and it'll be easier to accommodate the cars, but we might have a little bit of a tight squeeze for a couple of years while we have Winona 10 still at Excelsior Harriet, or at Excelsior, I'm sorry. I think that's about it. Any questions?
All right, hearing none. Thank you, Dick. That concludes all our reports. Our last piece of business for the meeting is the election of directors. And as Jim said, Dave French and I are unopposed, asking to run again. So I would entertain a motion to approve us by acclamation, and that would be Russ.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I hereby move that Dave French and Tyler and I are elected to fill the director positions on MSM's governing board of directors for a term of 3 years, which terms expire in March of 2022.
Is there a second? Okay. Bill Graham, I believe. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right. The last thing we can adjourn the meeting now, and here's what's going to happen. We're going to go, and I've got some films, a little bit of films for you on different things, and then what will follow right after that is the board meeting where we will appoint officers, and we will approve the 2019 budget. You're certainly welcome to stick around for the board meeting. So, Ben, John, I think we want to get the lights a little bit. I don't know what it takes to dim them down.